So today marks 5 years since Hurricane Katrina, and basically my story is I was in Metairie, Louisiana, living there. It was my first week of junior year at Grace King High School, and my band played a show at Cypress Hall, which is now called the High Ground, in Fat City. And we had about 300 people at our show. Had some people over my house. After, we were watching TV, hanging out, flipping through the channels. We didn't see anything about a hurricane headed towards us, Category 5 hurricane coming. Basically, the next morning, my mom wakes me up and she's like, "Come on, pack up all your stuff, grab a couple things, we gotta go. There's a Category 5 hurricane coming, we gotta go." So, we got on the I-10 heading towards Baton Rouge. My aunt and uncle, my grandma, and my grandpa were in another car. We were caravanning. It took us 6 hours to drive to Baton Rouge. We stayed with my aunt's brother, and their grandparents were there, and their kids. So basically, the next day after we got there, that next night, the storm started, and it was the craziest storm I'd ever experienced. I was looking out the window, looking at a tree going horizontally. You know, it was scary, really. It was scary, and all the power was off, phones were off, everything. And so, a couple days later, about 2 days later, the power comes back on. Phones still didn't work. All the cell phone towers were down. Basically, we were watching the news, and I was looking at the damage of the city and the damage of my grandparents' neighborhood in Lakeview. And basically, I was thinking, yo, my girlfriend at the time stayed with her family and my boys, and I'm thinking, yo, all my friends are dead. I couldn't get my phone didn't work. I'm thinking they drowned in the hurricane. So I was bugging out, and a couple days later, my mom, she's a public school teacher, and she was working in Metairie, and she got a call from her school saying that she was laid off because a lot of these families were not going to come back, and so she was laid off. And so then I pretty much had to figure out what I was going to do, and I decided to move in with my dad, who lives in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and my mom went back to Detroit, where we were living before. My mom's born and raised in New Orleans. My grandma was born and raised in New Orleans. But we lived in Detroit. I was born in Detroit. I only lived in New Orleans for 2 years before Katrina. So basically, I went to live with my dad for 5 months, and then when I turned 17, I moved. I moved back to New Orleans, and got my band back together. Even though they had relocated, we all went back to New Orleans and we started playing again. And there's a lot of other details I'm leaving out. At one point, I bounced around a lot when I moved back to New Orleans. I didn't really have a steady home, and at one point I was living with my boy Cody, and his parents and his little sister were staying in the FEMA trailer. His house was gutted out, and the garage they made into like a makeshift apartment, sort of temporary. They had 2 AC units. New Orleans gets real hot, and basically, Cody was my boy. He was one of my best friends, even though I met him after Katrina. And a little bit after that, my mom relocated to Orlando a couple months after Katrina. When I moved back to New Orleans, she moved to Orlando. She found a job teaching out there. So in the beginning of my senior year, I decided to move to Orlando to live with my mom. And 2 months later, I got a call that Cody had passed away due to drugs. And I think a big part of it was the fact that he didn't have a home because Katrina wrecked his home, and we were all living in the garage, and he was living in the garage, and he was able to do things that maybe if he was in his house, he wouldn't have been able to have so much privacy or whatever. And so, Katrina affected me in many ways, and after Cody passed away, I moved back to New Orleans, and I started playing in his band that he was in. And I played the show that was supposed to be his first show at Cypress, which was renamed the High Ground, and that was supposed to be his first show, and I filled in for him. And then after that, I decided I'm moving back to New Orleans, and so I lived there until 3 years ago, and went to Grace King, and I actually dropped out a couple months before graduation. Got my diploma now, but whatever. But I haven't gone back there since, and I really want to. I feel like New Orleans is in my blood, and you know, I just want to say that Katrina affected a lot of people in a lot of different ways, and to this day, people are still affected by what happened in New Orleans. So that's my New Orleans Katrina story, shortened. Alright, Saadyah Tzvi, peace.